For everyone who is joining us, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on wherever in the globe you're joining us from. Welcome to this fantastic session that we have lined up on resetting boundaries, and particularly a discussion on the rising religious fundamentalism that is affecting sexual and reproductive rights. It is indeed, for me, a clear statement to say that democracy and human rights is under threat. Many years ago, if I made that statement, people would, of course, associate it with civil and political rights. The assumption when you say that democracy is under threat is that it is civic rights, the right to vote, the right to life that is under threat. But indeed, today, we see a newfound form of threats to human life, and this is in the form of rising fundamentalism. Today, I am joined by three who are already here in the panel, and one who will join us shortly, Reverend Kapya, Kaoma, hopefully. I'm joined by four fantastic panelists who are going to help us unpack what is fundamentalism, what is the resistance that we're seeing to issues such as access to safe abortion, LGBT rights, right to contraception, surrogacy rights, etc. To start us off, we have Masuma Ranalvi from India. Please correct me if I am butchering any of your names, but I would want you to introduce yourself, because what I have and what I would do would not do any justice to the fantastic activism that you do in India. To guide us and to start us off, Masuma, please could you elaborate for us what is meant by religious fundamentalism, or just fundamentalism generally, and how is it affecting sexual and reproductive rights globally? Masuma, over to you.
Thank you so much, Tabitha, and thank you, everybody. Thank you, Aspen, for giving me this opportunity. And just a quick introduction. I come from India, and I am part of an organization which is We Speak Out. I am spearheading a movement in India to end the practice of female genital mutilation, which, yes, it exists in India. And I'm working on gender rights, and I work on various issues related to violence against women. And so let's go with our very first question about what is fundamentalism. So 23-year-old Anupama Chandran hails from a southern state in India, which is Kerala. She committed 3 cardinal sins. One is she fell in love with a married man. She fell in love is the first sin, actually. She fell in love with a married man. She had a child out of wedlock. And most importantly, she fell in love with a lower caste man. Anupama belongs to a dominant caste compared to Ajit, who belongs to a Dalit family, who are formerly known as the Untouchables, and who languish at the bottom of India's rigid caste hierarchy. Caste gets its sanction from Manusmriti, which is a most important and authoritative text on Hindu laws in India. Under the caste system, there is no question of inter-caste marriage. A violent enforcement of the caste system, I would say, is all about controlling a woman's sexuality. Anupama gave birth to a child out of wedlock, and what followed was horrific. She was judged, humiliated, attacked by society and her family. All possible attempts were made to break her relationship with this lower caste man. She was forcibly separated from her newborn child. The family, the government, and the law enforcement agencies, the adoption agencies, all of whom were hostile to her and aided and abetted in this. Much against her wishes, her child was taken away from her within 3 days of his birth. And then her family gave up this child for adoption without her knowledge. It took a year of grueling struggle, including filing several cases in courts, running to the police, having protest marches outside the court, till finally, under a court order, she, her son, and now her husband had to undergo DNA tests to prove the paternity of the child. And based on that, Finally, the court ordered that the child be given back to her after 1 whole year. This happened in November 23rd, barely a week ago. And this case, I think, is the best way to describe what religious fundamentalism is all about. It is absolutist and intolerant in nature. It is anti-women and patriarchal. It is anti-human rights and freedoms. Fundamentalism, the term signifies, it means that it's related to the fundamentals of religion, but actually it is nothing but religious orthodoxy. And finally, it is about politics and power, because none of this would have happened in the Anupama case without the full support of the state and the government. Religions have always sought to control women and their reproduction. Today, we see a global growth of authoritarian religious groups and movements which are fundamentalist in nature. Though originating in different religions, all seem to have a major focus in terms of controlling women's fertility. There are renewed attempts today to rejuvenate the traditional religious discourse interpreted from a strictly patriarchal viewpoint. What is actually worrisome is that almost all major religions in the world today are somehow afflicted by the malady of orthodoxy to different extents. For one, this greatly endangers the accomplishments made by women in reclaiming their rights over their bodies and their reproductive rights. Secondly, increasingly, we are seeing a direct clash of interests between gender activists and religious extremists. What is worrisome is that the latter tend to shape and formulate state policies and use nation states as a platform for spreading their agenda. Take India and the countries in the subcontinent Asia. Religion has a huge influence on public policy and personal laws. What do you mean by personal laws? Personal laws are laws which are relating to marriage, family, adoption, custody, maintenance. These are all determined by religion. So no matter a country like India may have a secular constitution, but as far as these laws are concerned, they are all determined by religion. So issues
Wow.
like child marriage, FGM, abortion rights, bodily integrity, the right to sexuality and choices, the use of contraceptives are all intricately linked to religious sanction and are subject to religious orthodox views. Conservative religious practice and
Mhm.
beliefs around premarital sex contribute largely to child marriages. Preserving honor is a very big story in India and the subcontinent. And estimates suggest that each year, at least 1.5 million girls under 18 are married in India, which makes it a home to the largest number of child brides in the world, accounting for a third of the global total. Nearly 16% of adolescent girls in India today, aged 15 to 19, are married. Within religions and religious discourse, we see patriarchal control of women is multi-layered. So these layers include social constructions of women, women's purity, honor that define a woman's personal identity along with her communal identity. I'm an FGM survivor. As a Muslim woman, my work today primarily consists in challenging and questioning archaic ideas of religion and culture, questioning the stranglehold which the religious clerics have over women's bodies and their sexual rights. I question the very ideas of purity and honor, which are the
Mhm.
basis of practices like FGM. Let me
Thank you,
tell you
Ms.
that the practice of FGM constitutes one of the most inhuman and degrading forms of violence against girls and women. And in 2015, when I, along with other women from my community, spoke publicly about sexual and physical trauma that was inflicted upon us by the community leaders, there was a severe backlash by the Orthodox religious leaders of my community. And the tool they used to silence us was social boycott. They pressured the men, extended families, society to stop speaking to us asking for a ban, threatening to cut us off economically and socially from our families. In spite of all these threats and attacks, we carry on. And like me, there are hundreds of Muslim women who are demanding reforms in the archaic discriminatory laws and practices. We have time and again been accused by members of our own community of being westernized elites, of being anti
Mhm.
Islam, anti Sharia, people who've deviated from the faith on one hand. And it's important to realize that on the other hand, we face the brunt of the majoritarian Hindu right wing politics, which seeks to marginalize Muslim minorities. The backlash which we have seen is many a times from women itself. Women who internalize scriptures and describe women as sinners, manipulators, and temptresses. The gendering of the body of and the sexuality does great violence to women. The male, on the other hand, is considered a norm, and the scriptures are used to define women as defective, sinful, and needing to be controlled, even by violence. But
Masuma,
women are I just got 1 minute, last line
yes.
actually.
Okay. All right.
Women are ferociously resisting fundamentalism. That's the good news. And the biggest weapon that we have is courage and not being bound down. We are invisible no more, and we will continue to fight. Thank you.
Thank you so much for setting the platform, Masuma, and for giving those courageous words that are actually based on your own lived experiences. I am now hoping that our last panelist to join us, Reverend Kapya Kaoma, has caught his breath and is able to introduce himself to the panel. And by doing so, Reverend, we should probably announce that Joy and I are beneficiaries of a lot of the work that you did. Right from when we met you many years ago, when we had the Global Rights Watch, which was set up by both IPAS and Planned Parenthood Global, we have looked up to you in terms of being the trendsetter in discussions on fundamentalism in Africa. Reverend Kapya Kaoma, the floor is yours. And the question that I'd love to pose to you right now is, having done the two most quoted researches, which is on globalizing culture, globalizing the culture wars, as well as colonizing African values, what can you be able to tell us around the morphing and the shifting of these fundamentalists since when you wrote about it early 2009? Reverend Kapia, please introduce yourself for the benefit of anyone who's just joined us, and then give us a little bit within under 5 minutes on what you think between 2009 to 2021 has been the distinction of how fundamentalists have morphed, either in the actors, the strategies, and the messaging. You have to unmute yourself, Reverend Kapia.
I always forget to unmute myself. There's a poem I've written about unmuting your Africa, unmute yourself. It's a poem. I don't want to talk about it today. My name is Kapya Kaoma, originally from Zambia, currently based in the US in Boston. I'm a minister, a reverend in the Anglican Church. I don't know, people always think Anglicans are on the other side of the world, but how do I still maintain my membership and still practicing the Anglican Church and still talk about these important issues? But I'm an Anglican and I'm proud of being an Anglican and talk openly about issues that matter to my faith. I have followed up these issues concerning the issues of sexuality and mostly about Africa and the globe and how the US as being at the center of what is transpiring in Africa, but also now what is transpiring around the globe. Unfortunately, this link was not paid attention to. We didn't pay much attention to it for so many years. At that time, the US conservatives started building partnerships between themselves and other religions. Now they have gone global, and that's what the purpose of my research, Globalizing the Culture Wars. Though it was centered on Africa, they went to Latin America, they went to the Muslim worlds. They don't like Muslims, but on these issues, they are in bed together, all right? That's the only time they will be in the UN kissing each other's boots. It's when they are talking about the rights of women. You will see them holding hands together. But when they go again, after that, one is a demon, the other one is a good Christian. That's how it works. On these rights, opposing women's rights and LGBTQI rights, they are brothers and sisters. And they can sleep in the same room and on the same bed. And this is how hard it is to oppose them. Now, what has changed with this? I want us to get this right. In the past, when we use the right religious fundamentalists, people tend to think about this as we are talking about the crazy guys, those guys who are standing up with the Bible, all right? I want us to move from that. Please get it right. The battle has shifted. Over these 10 years, what I've observed is a complete change in the whole strategy. And we are in for it. We are not talking anymore about people like the guys I studied over those 10 years. We are now talking about the well-respected church hierarchies of the bishops, and the most important of all is Pope Francis. So we have now the Catholic hierarchy. So in the past, when you said fundamentalists, we are talking about these independent small groups of Christian leaders whom we don't usually give so much respect to. But now we are talking about respected religious leaders, educated with PhDs, to whom we ascribe a lot of authority and power when they speak. And my fear now is this: with what is happening in the US, if this law is changed about women's rights in the US, this is going to be a change maker going global. And should Roe v. Wade be turned by the Supreme Court, the world is in for it. And we should see a lot of laws now being passed on the premise that the US no longer upholds women's rights. Thus, they are going to use this with the Catholic Church still demanding that we still continue to denounce abortion rights. We'll see a lot of change in how this is going to go global. So, friends, we need to change the strategy here, because it's no longer about those small, crazy guys, people with PhDs with a lot of power.
Thank you so much for that, Reverend Kapya, and thank you for reaffirming that it is no longer Sharon Slater, Scott Lively coming into Africa, jetting in and sharing the message. That what they have now done is that they have found people who look and talk like us to carry on the message for credibility, to carry on the message to reaffirm that this is coming from the original people themselves, and to make it look like it is us, we the people, who are actually resisting. Yeah. Yet we still see strong interrelated, deep connections of financing, deep connections of messaging between Sharon Slater and the young activists that are now doing this through either Empowered Youth Coalition or many other groups that have now been formed, not just in Africa, but as Masuma told us, this is something that is happening globally. And we all nodded our heads as Masuma spoke, because while she's in India, we resonate so much with everything that she's saying. I want to come now to our two activists from Ghana and Uganda, that is Joy Asasira and Danny. Joy, I'm going to start with you and just ask, given what Reverend Kapya has said around the morphing of strategy, that it is no longer the crazy man with the Bible, but it is the Pope who is leading this onslaught, Are there any means or strategies that are being used by activists in Africa to resist this fundamentalism? And what can you share as your own experiences, having worked in this space, on what people are doing right to fight back?
Thank you, Tabitha. Thank you, Masuma, and thank you, Reverend Kapya. And thank you, everyone who's joining us in this conversation. My name is Joya Sasira. I invest in Uganda, but I work with Tabitha in Kenya. So I will share. Forgive me if I mix and mash Kenya and Uganda, because we find that the strategies are the same. And as Reverend Kapya has said, he's spot on. The US has exported its hate, its intolerance, its discrimination, and it is so rife right now in Africa, and we are seeing this every day as we do our work in Uganda and Kenya. My background is as a lawyer, and I've been doing advocacy and campaigning around sexual reproductive health rights, and particularly access to abortion in Uganda and Kenya and the region. So strategies, what have we seen is working, given that the strategies are changing, and given that the opposition is becoming more, more tactical, especially with the onset of, the pandemic and the over-reliance on social media and virtual, sort of platforms. So one of the things that we are seeing really works is to work towards deplatforming the opposition groups, or the religious conservatives and other anti-rights groups. Deplatforming could look like reporting them on to Twitter, Facebook, YouTube for spreading disinformation, or for bullying, cyberbullying, or even just spreading hate across the globe, but in specific countries. So an example is in working with Tabitha and a few other colleagues in Kenya, we're able to realize that one of the main religious conservative groups, the Kenya Christian Professionals Forum, was undertaking, had set up a GoFundMe page for their annual, gala. So they were collecting money to, of course, advance their work, which includes sort of pushing back against women's rights and bodily autonomy, access to abortion, and all these services. So we were able to come together as a group and report them and to the GoFundMe entity. And in 2 days, they were, their GoFundMe page was taken down. So we took away money and power, because, like someone said, power and politics are very critical to advancing their agenda. Another thing that we're doing is collecting and documenting trends, information, and this could be, we've been doing it ad hocly, I think, in the past as either individuals, organizations, through, going to specific sites, checking Twitter, following specific individuals, and, signing up for their monthly or weekly bulletins. But I think also what's becoming more important, or what we are realizing, is that we need systems. So how do we set up early warning, early response systems that have dashboards and are able to analyze and forecast that an attack is coming, or that there is a coming trend? And I think Dr. Kapya has said this, that he realized that there was a trend that was coming, and he talked about it. But, people didn't take heed. Maybe, I don't want to speculate on why people didn't take heed, but maybe if you had a system that had, sort of collected the data and information, maybe people who needed to listen up would listen up. So that's one thing that we are also doing. We're working towards building these systems, but also continuing to use the ad hoc methods. The audience, how do we talk to people? How are we packaging our message? Masoma has talked about, what they're doing in India, but how do you know that you're speaking to people? How do you know that they are hearing you and they're relating to you? How do you know that they are willing to join you in your cause, in your campaign? And I think starting to do audience research, segmenting these audiences, understanding what resonates with people. We've seen our colleagues in Latin America really using these kinds of listening tools and approaches. Colleagues in the US from the Amy Simons entity have done some research, and they found that being able to speak from a perspective of values, trying to find what sort of resonates with what values you share with the people you're trying to speak with, and starting there as a point of consensus, rather than starting off on two totally different pages. Try and find the middle ground and speak to people. So there are many entities that are doing this kind of research, and it's very important, because messaging is one of the ways in which we grow our numbers and also reach out to the centers of power and politics where decisions and policy implementation happens. engaging the media. I think this also goes to the deplatforming point, but also critically, the media are a big sort of vehicle for disinformation, and we know that the anti-rights groups, the conservatives, the religious conservatives and fundamentalists, they strive on disinformation. That is their main strategy in their playbook. So how are we countering disinformation? We've been working with media groups, media houses and individuals, training them in what disinformation looks like. We've been in talks with different media houses to advise them to put in place, a desk where disinformation is sort of tracked and followed up in real time, so that papers are not going out or pieces are not going out where disinformation is, being actively sent out or intentionally sent out. And in Kenya, we've realized that, Nation Media is one of these houses that has continued to have sort of have threads of disinformation taking place, and also practices where, for instance, a journalist who is not ordinarily or hasn't been writing about sexual reproductive health rights, but we find that now suddenly they're writing about sexual reproductive health rights issues, gender issues, but they are writing about them in a non-evidence, non-accurate, disinformation type of way. And we're finding that this is a strategy that is being used by the other side, which I'll call the red team, as we codenamed them. Tabitha, I'm about to finish, and please feel free to stop me if I'm running out of time, but I wanted to make two other points. I think that intersectoral conversation is critical. The OPO, the religious conservatives, they do not, pick and choose issues. As long as it advances their agenda, if it's SRH, if it's gender justice, if it's LGBTIQ issues, if it's climate change, the climate change conversation, they will jump on that bandwagon and they will sing like an orchestra or a band, and they don't need to be prompted twice to join the fight. But I think on our end, what needs to happen more, and what we are trying to do as advocates in this space, is to have that intersectional conversation, because we are working in silos. We are forgetting that the enemy is the same, that the strategies are the same, and resources are limited. So if each one of us wants to sort of have a go at it and have our own wins, then I think we are missing the point. And I think that collaborative effort of sharing resources, information, is very important. And we're also seeing that people in trade now are a critical, or people working on trade issues are a critical ally, because the opposition groups or the anti-rights groups are attacking trade, documents, trade negotiation policies, as long as their issues are in any way threatened. And second last is capacity building. Capacities are lacking. Capacities have been lacking for a long time, especially in the global South. So building capacities around strategic communications, building capacities around security, whether digital or personal, is very critical to be able to be to take on this work meaningfully and in a sustainable manner. Tabitha, I'll stop there, but I can talk forever if I'm given a chance.
Only electricity and technology will stop you. Thank you so much, Joy, for sharing with us both insights on what we're doing in Kenya and across the border in Uganda. Danny's camera is not working, so I'm going to disappoint a few people. I'm not sure whether it has started working, Danny, but if you can hear us, please unmute yourself. I'd want to now focus our attention to Ghana, where you're based, Danny. Please introduce yourself to the people. I will try and send out a picture of you at some point, but if you could tell us what's happening, because Ghana has been on everyone's lips for the last few months, particularly given the anti-homosexuality laws that have been fronted in your parliament. So Danny, could you please just tell us what's going on and what efforts are being made to resist these fundamentalist efforts in Ghana?
Okay, so I am Danny Bediako, and I'm the founder and executive director of Rightify Ghana. We are an LGBT-led human rights organization, and we also work with feminists and other women groups as well. So when Joy was speaking, Joy made mention about disinformation. And currently now in Ghana, we have this whole pandemic of disinformation, because religious fundamentalists and people who support this far-reaching anti-LGBT bill currently in Parliament are using disinformation to promote their bill. And they are attacking strategies and programs, including sexual reproductive rights. Because some of them keep claiming that it's a false claim though, that 8 out of 10 new HIV cases are people who are gays and bisexuals. By saying this, they are blaming the LGBT community for HIV prevalence in Ghana, and are also, in a way, indirectly making people, giving them false hope. Because if you are saying that, if I'm not an LGBT person, then it means that I can do unprotected sex. In a way, they are exposing them to unprotected, to HIV. And this is going on in this country, and these people are mostly religious fundamentalists. And this started in 2019, when I heard you mention Sharon, yes, and they were here in 2019. And this 2019 is how everything really started, when news broke somewhere that the government was going to introduce comprehensive sexuality education in our schools. And these religious fundamentalists rose against the government, they rose against the Ghana Education Service, and these people were arguing based on their religious beliefs. They had not read the document, because the document, people make arguments and they are not basing them on fact, but based on things that someone who has not read this policy or this document was telling them. And it's like, okay, so this is a gay agenda. Meanwhile, this policy was because Ghana has a teenage pregnancy problem. Since 2016 to 2020, Ghana has had more than 555,000 teenage pregnancies in a country of about 30 million. So averagely, we have more than 107,000 teenage pregnancy cases in Ghana. HIV cases were also rising, but these people don't even see the need to even read the bill, to know the kind of education that the government wanted to introduce to even tackle some of these problems. But they said it is a policy that was going to be used to promote LGBT in Ghana. And part of their tactics was that they threatened the government, and they use, I remember you made mention of politics and power. Reverend made mention of politics and power. And that's exactly what they did. They used their numbers, because the Ghana Pentecostal and Charismatic Council told the president that they have membership of 8 million. And this 8 million would vote against any government that would pass or that would introduce that policy. So the president had nothing to say, and then went into a church to announce that it will not be under his watch, that they will introduce that policy. So he's not interested in that policy. So the policy got dropped. And this is how they use the power that they have amassed against policies that help people, that are going to help women, that are going to help LGBT people, that are going to help adolescents. But because of the lack of commitment and the lack of political will, the government always fall to their threat, and they have to just drop these policies. And to look on it, trying to solve some of these problems, what I've seen is that people are beginning to hold them accountable. And I think we need to do some of these more, to hold them accountable for misinformation and abusive practices. Especially in our social media circles, we see feminist groups and individuals make social media posts demanding that the police, the government attend to a certain situation when we see that a religious person or a pastor has abused their power. In 2019, I was at one meeting when someone brought this issue that there's a pastor whom at his church, he was sleeping with some women in the church. He picked up HIV, and then instead of going to the clinic for treatment, he decided not to go because he thought he's the pastor, and then being seen at the facility would in a way not go well with some church members because of the tag they have on HIV, making it look like you are an immoral person or you lived an immoral life. That's why you contracted HIV. So because of these claims that they make, he didn't want to go. But when another church member got HIV and started treatment, this pastor, through counseling, and then the person had to go through counseling at this pastor's church. Through counseling, the pastor got to know that the woman had HIV. So he told her not to be taking the medication. So anytime she goes to take the drugs from the clinic, she brings it to the pastor. That because the pastor says he will pray it away, it's a spiritual thing and all that. The pastor picks the medication and puts it in the dustbin. The woman sees that. Immediately, the woman leaves the room. The pastor picks these medication and starts taking them because he knows he has the virus. So he needs something to stay alive. The woman died. Someone got to hear about this, but what could be done? We haven't held them accountable for these practices that are denying people access to this correct information. This is things that are going on in our country. And, we need to start challenging fundamentalism from within religious discourses. We need to find progressive parts of the scripture so that we know how to tackle them, these issues. Because if we continue to say that because they are religious fundamentalists, they will continue to expose because their membership keeps growing. People go there looking for help. When they have situations, they keep advising them. So people will keep going there. So we need to find spaces within their religious texts that would conform or align with the scientific proven facts and to help solve some of the situation. And we need to support charismatic clergy people that we know are there and are ready to listen. We need to support them and also make them part of our programs. Also, we need to provide a comprehensive and accurate information and space, just as Joy was mentioned about messaging, communication, even engaging with the media. We need to create these spaces, more of these spaces, because even within them, these women themselves belong to these churches. So if a woman who has been at this church and has been taught or picked up this ideology, if we don't find a space where we engage them to educate them on some of the things that the church are leading them to even deny, then we might not go ahead in even this discussion of sexual reproductive rights. So we need to do more. Yes, thank you very much.
Sorry for cutting you short. I am aware that we are not doing very well on time, but if I picked what you said, and let me reiterate it for the people who've just joined us, one of the things that Danny has emphasized is that these people do not read, they do not care about facts, and they will use whatever spaces that they have. And one of the things that we must do more is that we must preach. And I'm very happy that we have people like Reverend Kapya Kaoma, who is on our side. And therefore, Danny, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to ask Reverend Kapya Kaoma to do more well, I don't think he can probably do any more than he has done over the years. But Danny asks for our help, and I think it's the recognition that we need to know that there are certain religious leaders that are on our side and who can help us unpack the same scriptures that they use to weaponize women's rights. In a round of about just two minutes each, my last question to this wonderful panel is this. We've heard your struggles. We've heard of the things that are being done to resist. We've also heard of how opposition has morphed, these fundamentalists have morphed. Starting from Masuma, my question to you in less than 2 minutes is, what can funders do more to assist those of us who have the courage to everyday fight back? In 2 minutes, what are your top thoughts, Masuma, around what can funders do more to support this work?
Okay, yeah, okay. Okay, so first, I think there's a lot of resonance in what is being spoken around, and I completely so related to what Reverend Kapya said about, the unity of fundamentalists, when it comes to women's rights, when it comes to gender rights, no matter how on the opposite side of the fences they are united in that. That's one commonality which exists across the board for all religions. The thing is that religion is not a given, it is a negotiated reality. And I think that is what is important. And it resonates with what Danny also said, is that we need to work with religious leaders like Reverend Kapya. And the fact that religion is not determined by any one person, that we all have a say in it, we all believe in it, and so we all have a right to determine that. I think that's one important thing. And the second thing which I want to say is that what we need to be working together on is a gender transformative approach, because as Joy also spoke, that instead of working in our small little silos on our individual issues, or what we need is a broad-based work which kind of impacts everybody. So when there is a fundamentalism which is happening, when there is a religious orthodoxy, it impacts all aspects of life, and it impacts all aspects of a woman's rights most specifically. So the need would be for funders also to look at more work of a more foundational nature, where we look at a gender transformative approach, we look at religious leaders, community members alike, to make this kind of a change in mindsets, so that you can challenge forces of fundamentalism which are on the rise. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Masuma. Reverend Kapya, do you have enough money, or do you need any more to continue doing the fantastic work? And what can we do to assist you with the fortune telling that you've been doing over the years?
Thank you. Again. Okay, can you hear me? First, I just want to say, Danny, thank you for the work you're doing in Ghana. I really sympathize. But know that you're not alone. There are people who are praying for you and thinking of you. I hope we did more.
Thank you, Reverend. Yeah, it's just not easy. With this bill, what is going on currently in Ghana is that these religious fundamentalists, they have a coalition, the homophobic coalition, that put together this bill and named it after themselves. Because the coalition is the National Coalition for Human Sexual Rights and Family Values. And they named the bill the Proper Human Sexual Rights and Ghanaian Family Values Bill. So it's a bill that they have picked up from the World Congress of Families, which is the group that is now sending these ideologies around Africa and now funding these what they claim to be pro-family and then against women's rights and against choice. This is what they are currently doing. So they put together this bill and then sent it to them. They are really funding them, and everything that they are doing is something that really is un-Ghanaian, because even the way they speak, when you listen to them speak and then you watch any of these US right-wing people. It is the same language. And I remember one of the speakers was saying earlier, it is the same language, the same message, and the same strategy they are using. So if you have followed it, what is happening in the US, you can really kind of predict what is coming next.
Okay,
and when they meet
Dan,
our politicians,
we
when they
can
meet
talk
our
about that.
politicians, I was going
We'll
to
talk
add
about
something small.
Go
When
on,
they meet our politicians in Parliament, before, when they were sending their memo to Parliament, so they had this photo up. One MP that is cheerleading the bill in Parliament had this photo with over 30 clergymen behind him. In a way, sending a strong message to parliamentarians that this is what you need to do. Otherwise, we are going to vote you out. So again, it's about the politics and the power. When they appeared before the committee, they wanted to make this, but an MP said that you cannot threaten us. But behind closed doors, they are scared because it's about the vote. All right, Reverend, sorry, thank you.
No, it's okay. I predicted that in one of my writings long before this came up. I wrote about your situations long ago about that when it happened. So we'll talk about that later. The mistake we have made with the funders, we have separated the human rights frame from the religious frame. And we pour so much money in the human rights frame on the progressive side or the liberal side. More money has been pressed on the liberal or human rights frame. We negate the religious frame. On the conservative end is the other way around. They pour money in the religious frame. And this is how they are going to win, and they are winning in the US court, all right? What we are going to lose for 50 years, we moved with the human rights frame, the conservatives went with the religious frame. It is the churches which are going to end Roe versus Wade, all right? And what is happening in Ghana the same way in Africa. We have negated the religious frame for so long and gone with the human rights frame. And we like it or not, one after another, Africa is going to fall to this conservative game because unfortunately, Africa or the world the Western world may be becoming less religious. But the more we become less religious, the more this small fundamentalist group become more powerful because they're most organized, all right? And the insecurity grows. So the region becomes the safe haven. And there is no battle which is more intense than fighting a religious battle. So to them, they put all this in the religious frame and they're willing to die for it. We need to get to the same plane. And my plea to the funders is rethink your strategy, or else Ghana was a quiet place when it came to LGBTQ activism. Rarely did we hear about it. All of a sudden, boom, and we don't know what to do. And we can make noise. This bill will pass. One way or another. It happened in Nigeria. In Zambia, we put so much emphasis, and this is what I have to tell you. We are putting so much emphasis on bills, all right? There are countries which have passed laws with no even discussions about the bill. In Zambia, being gay, you go to jail for 15 years. And it's just 2019 when the couple was sentenced to 15 years in prison. All right? That law was passed just before even after Nigeria. Okay, we have these laws coming by the fundamentalists and the religious. This is why I'm trying to become crazy now. Let's stop using even the word fundamentalist, because we are trying to listen. Come on, the Pope is involved. Let's talk about the religious leaders. This language of fundamentalists is making them look like we are talking about those crazy guys who don't think. This is a coordinated effort by people we respect, people who stand in the United Nations wars, people who are represented on every platform of human rights, all right? But we want to present them like they are not in the wars of all these negotiations. The Vatican is at the United Nations, seated on human rights negotiations. And they're the ones who are driving these laws across the globe. Why don't we name the elephant in the room? And this is the Vatican. Pope Francis must be called out for who he is if we have to talk human rights the way it's supposed to do. To try and eat the Pentecostals, they are not at the UN, all right? The Vatican is at the UN. The people who called for the gay rights to be arrested, activists to be arrested in Ghana, they are Roman Catholic bishops, all right? Not a Pentecostal pastor, but Roman Catholic bishops. Why are we not talking about them? Because they have power. We are afraid of them. If we are not going to be silent anymore and invisible anymore, why should we be afraid to name their names? Come on. Next time we organize something and let's talk about the Catholic Church and what it's doing to deny other people their rights. Let's be bold. Just as they have been naming us, we should name them and shame them for who they are. They are hypocrites when it comes to how they are doing these things. Sorry, I can lose it. Forgive me.
Thank you, Reverend Kapya. And I can promise you that I will make sure that there is another platform that is created beyond today for us to name and shame. Because I think that there is power in everything that you've said around the control that the Vatican has at the UN. For anyone who might not know, there was an application more recently, not just for the Vatican to sit where it sits at the General Assembly, but to also become an observer at the World Health Organization. And this application successfully passed. And I'm quite embarrassed to say as a Kenyan that my country was among the 16 countries that co-sponsored this. So in an effort not to remain invisible anymore and to name and shame, I want to name and shame Kenya and the representatives that actually endorsed that application for the Vatican to be enjoined into the World Health Assembly in terms of being a permanent observer, whatever that means. To Joy and Danny, I want to give you your 2 minutes because I feel that we have robbed you of the chance to give us your perspectives as activists, advocates, and you know, people who are living these truths every day. What do you think in 2 minutes can be done as we wrap up the session by funders to create more spaces for you?
Thanks, Tabitha. And I was just like, go Reverend, because I think the truth, you know, what do they say, the truth hurts? But I think we need to pull up that Band-Aid and have that conversation once and for all. For the funders, I think one, like a really basic recommendation is to fund this kind of work. I don't think many funders are putting, you know, are allocating funding for this kind of work because first of all, it's very unpredictable. It's not linear. It's hard to measure. It's not, you know, it's not obvious, and there's so many risks. But I think the risks have to be taken because if they are funding policy work and advocacy and service delivery, but then the religious groups, I'm going to stop saying fundamentalists because I think I really resonate with what Bert has said. If the religious groups are, you know, attacking these policies and trying to, you know, create retrogression in you know, these on these aspects, then I think it's like pouring. One person once said it's like you're mopping the floor and the tap is open. It will never happen. So I think the funding for this kind of work to track, preempt, you know, mitigate attacks has to be a priority for funders. And then the second thing is to say funders need to coordinate, consult, and listen to grantees, especially grantees doing this work, because they're, you know, experts in their own context. They're on the ground, and you know, they really do have an understanding of the ecosystem. And rather than, you know, and this is a common practice for funders to have these goals and objectives and programs that they then want grantees to plug into. I think there needs to be a conversation before these programs, projects are put together. And then finally, funding needs to be flexible, because you will not believe the type of work or activities that need to take place for us to be able to track, for us to be able to sometimes you even have to pay dinner for your, you know, pay and attend a dinner of your enemy, because that's what it takes to get the intel. Sometimes you need to, you know, fundraise, support your enemy to fundraise, because you want to fit in or to access a specific space. So if funders want accountability for every penny, if funders want, of course, accountability and integrity are, you know, should be values that we all espouse as advocates, but you need to be able to fund an individual. If you find that an individual is well placed and they are able to deliver on whatever needs to be done, fund them as an individual. Why do you have to insist on organizational structure? Do you have a bank account? Do you have a whatever? We know that, especially if you're dealing with LGBT IQ rights, in many countries, like my country, Uganda, we know that Chapter, for one of the leading organizations advocating for rights of LGBTI groups, is under, you know, has been shut down. They've been in court recently. Their executive director was arrested for a number of weeks and stayed in you know, under lock and key in prison because, you know, of the work that they are doing. So to expect people to work in a normal way, in a very abnormal, you know, time is maybe impossible. So I'd like to just, you know, send that call to funders.
Thank you, Joy. Allow flexibility and do not insist on the same measuring evaluation that we have for everything else, and down with work plans. That is a summary from Joy. Danny, you have the last word. What would you want funders to do better to assist you in Ghana?
So we want donors and funders to hold our government accountable, because we know there are state agencies like the Human Rights Commissions, the other agencies, including those in health and education. They do receive some funding and support from donors. And we want donors to hold them accountable, because we believe that they receive these support to come and believing they are going to support everyone in Ghana. But even with this bill, we were looking to see them more resistance from more state agencies. Even with the disinformation that these religious fundamentalists are doing on HIV, something that is dangerous and could even erode gains made in the fight against HIV. We have the Ministry of Health, the Ghana Health Service, and Ghana AIDS Commission keeping quiet. We were looking for them to make even a public statement against these claims, because people were using data that doesn't even exist, because it is not true that 8 out of 10 HIV cases in Ghana are related to gays and bisexuals, but they kept quiet. We want donors to hold them accountable, and we are looking for more donors to support community-based groups, because, for example, there are many things that we expect the state to do, but they are not doing. Community-based organizations and groups begin to do something, but because of funding, because of technical expertise and other supports that they need and capacities, we expect donors to find a way to give these community organizations some kind of support. And aside that, I wanted to also highlight something when it comes to activists ourselves or advocates. We need to also hold our own government, our own African government, accountable. Yes, we know that they have a responsibility in playing that role of regulating these religious organizations, religious fundamentalist groups or institutions. we should hold our government accountable in playing that role. If they are not enforcing their own regulations that they have laid down, we need to keep reminding them. We need to start going into the local offices of these agencies or state institutions and demand that they take action against people, individuals, and religious fundamentalist systems that continue to operate against sexual and reproductive health rights. We need to work against some of these practices that they are doing. So we need to hold our government accountable so that they can work in our favor as well. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Danny. I can see Reverend wants to have a last word.
Yeah, I just want to pray with you. And Joy, thank you for raising what you raised. Based on my experience, the best researcher are the ones who understand the context. But a lot of money is given to people based in the West to do work on Africa. I don't think that is fair. That is wasting a lot of resources. There should be this shift. Because when the money is thrown on this, the research usually speaks back to the West, not to the people it is intended to. My plea to the funders is, yes, the work may not seem to be relevant to the West because you may not understand it. But the same way your work produced in the US or in England looks irrelevant to an African, we need to really go to win this battle, friends. There should be more research produced or work done by activists on the ground in each continent we are working in, and invest a lot in that. As I've said, I use this paradigm. I tell people, now let me be silly and you get this. I ask people in America, which American has ever read a book about American history written by an African? And the answer is no one. But how many Americans have read about Africa written by an American? Everyone. And an African will say that is junk what you read. So please, the funders, trust African to produce relevant material for this fight. I love Africa, and I have a lot of faith and respect for African activists and scholars. They are capable of doing this work, but learn to understand them, and they won't have some of these things you ask them. It's just because they don't have, when they arrest them, they search everything. So the liberty we have here at times may not work there simply because they are doing this work in a dangerous environment. You have to understand that. And we're asking them like they are working in Boston. It's not just possible for some of the things. And we have to be flexible to understand the situations in which they work. So funders, be flexible. Joy, thank you for saying it out.
Fantastic. Ladies, gentlemen, and gender non-conforming colleagues, we have come to the end of our very, very informative 1.5 hours, I must say, of something that ought to have been 45 minutes. But I totally think that this was exactly what it was, and it started when it did, and we were in the right place at the right time. For anyone who has just joined us, we had a fantastic group of 4 panelists who have been able to unpack the following issues within the 1.5 hours. That number one, within any context, we are at war, and human rights, not just women's rights, but human rights generally are at risk. And therefore, With this, I want to thank everyone who joined us today, whether you joined us in the morning, in the evening, and in the afternoon. The total conclusion and sum total of the discussions that we've had today is as follows. That number one, that these rights are not just being attacked in Africa, that Masuma has indicated to us that while she is in India, while we are in Latin America, while some of us are in Europe, women's rights and generally human rights, including the rights of LGBT, are at risk. Secondly, that we have seen and witnessed unholy alliances between those who would often not be seen in bed together. But when it comes to challenging and agreeing on the rights of a woman or the rights of LGBT groups, there are unholy alliances that are being made. And these unholy alliances are not just between Christians and Muslims, but we're also seeing these alliances even amongst those who would possibly not be seen ever in daylight together. Thirdly, that there's a recognition that we're always working in silos, whether it's the academics, whether it's the researchers, whether it's the religious leaders, whether it is the activists. And we need to unpack and break those silos if we're going to get ahead in terms of resisting fundamentalism. And lastly, as advised by Reverend Kapya Kaoma, funders need to stop negating the religious frame, that as you put money into activism, into advocacy, do not forget to also spare some funds to go into the religious frame. Because for us to do this, we not only need the brave activists who are here, but we also need people like Reverend Kapya Kaoma, who is not just a researcher, but also a reverend to be able to help us with this. In closing shop, I want to give a quote that is often used by, quoted and referred to, that comes from Desmond Tutu. Anyone who knows Desmond Tutu would know how much name calling he's had and how much bravery he's had in terms of saying that he would never worship a homophobic God. Desmond Tutu is once quoted as saying that when missionaries came to Africa, they had the Bible and we had the land. And then they said, let us pray. We closed our eyes, and when we opened them, we had the Bible and they had the land. With these few remarks, I want to close up this session and thank you all for joining us. And thank you to everyone who made time for this, whether it was at 8 p.m., whether it was 7 a.m., at whatever time it is in the globe. Thank you very much. And this session will be given to the expo, so you may click in case you joined later, and you should be able to get it on replay as soon as we're done with this. Thank you, and enjoy your evening, your morning, or your lunchtime. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dan, let's be in touch.